When it comes to success for the New Orleans Saints in 2023, coaching and play calling, of course, will be under the microscope, but individual performances and execution will also top the list. So who are the most important players for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to success in 2023? We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. And a big shout out to all our everydayers out there. Don't forget, you can always subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. And as always, if you want to keep the conversation going one-on-one with me, take part in our exclusive film studies, Q&As, inside information, early access, and much more, you can head over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints to join a community that I would love for you to be a part of. As always, I am your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on your favorite social media, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media. You can find me as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the New Orleans Saints. You can also find me every Tuesday on the Locked On NFL podcast and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and enter the promo code Locked On NFL for $20 off of your first order. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So before we fully get started here, I'm throwing this in because I literally just finished recording when this news came out. And it's not super surprising. We kind of expected this to be the case, but Tre'Quan Smith's going to miss the first game of the season. He had surgery, it looks like, according to NOLA.com and Jeff Duncan. So we'll see if that injured reserve move ends up happening. DA said last week that they were looking at that or said this week they would kind of be looking into that next week when they have a little bit more of an idea about probably things like this, right? Like things like this. So we'll see what ends up happening and if that roster spot gets moved. But this would be potentially a situation where you move Tre'Quan Smith to injured reserve and then you elevate Jalen Smith to the active roster. And it just kind of follows up with what we've been kind of looking at. So we'll break this down a little bit more on Monday as well, but now I'm going to let you get back to the rest of the episode as it was originally intended for you today. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to be taking a look at the New Orleans Saints 53-man roster as compared to the rest of the NFC South, how they should lead the way when it comes to defense, and how they can match up very well over on the offensive side now that they've made some big adjustments. But first, who are the most important players to the New Orleans Saints' success in 2023? I took to Twitter, I took the subtext, I took to our Locked On Saints Insiders program and asked this question, asking to name 3 different players just to kind of get a gauge to see who you all thought maybe were the most important players. And it turns out that a lot of you are in lockstep, and we are in lockstep as well. Because look, there's a lot of players that are going to be integral to the success of the New Orleans Saints. Now, while I asked folks on social media to give me 3, I asked folks in the Locked On Saints Insider program to give me 5, I'm going to give you 3 on each side of the ball. And the way that I look at it, the reason why I look at it that way is because, look, there's always going to be success defined by either side of the football, right? We saw last year the New Orleans Saints defense playing stellar towards the latter half of the year, but the offense being myopic, being anemic, being in a situation where they weren't able to take advantage of the fact that the defense wasn't letting up more than 20 points in each of those last 8 games. But there were also situations in which the New Orleans Saints had to battle it out. The Cincinnati Bengals, the Seattle Seahawks, where the defense was kind of struggling a little bit, even coming back from behind to open up the season against the Atlanta Falcons, which was a little bit more on the offensive inefficiency early than it was on the defensive issues there. But the run game, all these other pieces. So who are the players that are going to change all that? Who are the ones that are going to ensure success or are going to be most integral to the success of the New Orleans Saints in 2023? Let's start over on the offensive side of the football. And I asked people to give me answers that were non-QBs because Derek Carr is a shoo-in here, right? He's the most important player at the most important position in football, maybe the most important position in sports. Some might make that argument as well. He's, of course, integral to your success. The New Orleans Saints heighten that even further by bringing him in giving him the big contract, all those other things. So all eyes are on Derek Carr to lead the New Orleans Saints offense, at least, to success, but really lead the franchise to success moving forward, or at least for the foreseeable future. So we know that Derek Carr is a part of that conversation. But outside of him, the other players that I look at are Taysom Hill, Chris Olave, and Trevor Penning. Let me explain why. Taysom Hill, we just know that when he scores touchdowns and when he's on the field, the New Orleans Saints win games. In games where he has taken at least 10 quarterback snaps, I think the Saints lost one of those games over the course of the past couple of years. He has been somebody that when he scores touchdowns, when he gets into the end zone, whatever it is, the New Orleans Saints win games. Now, it could be a little bit more correlation rather than causation, of course, but there is something about the way that Taysom Hill affects the game. And look, Taysom Hill was back at practice on Thursday, looked fine. He was working out with the tight ends. He was doing everything. He was going effectively full speed from what we could see during the media viewing period, ran some routes on air, all that. So it's good news on the Taysom Hill front when it comes to recovering and coming back from his injury. And so if he's ready to go week one, and if he's going to be able to go all 17 games, he could be a big-time difference maker for this New Orleans Saints team. And it doesn't hurt that he contributes in so many different ways. He can throw a touchdown for you. He can run a touchdown for you. He can catch a touchdown for you. He can stop a touchdown for you in terms of punt and kick coverage. He can block those punts. There's a lot of things that they ask him to do. And so there's so many different places where he impacts the game that inherently he's going to be integral to the success. All right, I got to speed up here. The next player is, of course, Chris Olave. Everything that you look at when it comes to Derek Carr, the measure of his success is going to effectively be measured by his ability to utilize and his chemistry when it comes to utilizing weapons all around the offense. And Chris Olave might be the most reliable and most important one going into 2023. And then I look at Trevor Penning because he's your blindside protector. He's the guy that doesn't have a ton of experience just yet, right? Didn't get a lot of opportunity to play last season, managing injuries, but played all throughout the preseason, was healthy throughout the preseason, had his ups and downs, more ups than downs, trending in the right direction. He's going to be your starter at left tackle. There's very little question about that. Really no question about that at this point. So I think you look at him as the guy that is the third player that is of the most significance when it comes to the success of the New Orleans Saints offense. That's not to say that guys like Ryan Ramczyk and Eric McCoy and all these others, Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, aren't important, but maybe these guys just have a little bit more of an edge in terms of how this team is successful in 2023. Over on the defensive side, it's simple. You pick one from each of the three levels, right? And not really much conversation to be had here. It's Cam Jordan over on the defensive line. It's Mario Davis at the second level, probably the best player on your team. And then it's Marshon Lattimore over on the outside. Marshon Lattimore missed 10 games last season. New Orleans Saints went 4-6 over the course of those 10 games. New Orleans Saints defense goes the way of Marshon Lattimore. If Marshon Lattimore is on the field healthy and successful, the New Orleans Saints are healthy and successful on the field. That's the way that it works. So you want to see Marshon Lattimore out there. He is integral to the New Orleans Saints defensive success. He is integral to the New Orleans Saints success. Now, you didn't think I was going to leave special teams out, did you? Me, Ross Jackson, the special teams guy. I think Blake Grupe has to be part of this conversation too. Will Lutz, who was the kicker last year, he missed kicks, field goals in 6 games. The New Orleans Saints went 2-4 in those 6 games, including 2 losses to the Carolina Panthers. And including also in those games, Carolina Panthers were a single score loss. The both games technically were single score losses. And then the Minnesota Vikings game was a single score loss. So if you flip those 3 games in favor, and I'm going to include the Carolina game where they actually lost by 8 points as a single score game because he missed 2 kicks in that game. So that's 6 points that were left on the field there. You consider that the New Orleans Saints could have been 10-7 if they flipped those 3 games, right? So all of a sudden they're a playoff team. So that's it. That's the margin of error for the New Orleans Saints. They're trying to combat from last year going into this year. And now they're going to a new kicker, a young kicker, an undrafted rookie kicker who is incredibly talented and who has the leg, but and because of all that, he's going to be integral to the New Orleans Saints success in 2023. Coming up next, the other thing that's going to be integral to the New Orleans Saints success in 2023 is how bad the NFC South is around them. Although, if we look at the depth charts, talent-wise, on paper, they have some competition within this division that can't be slept on. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of Locked On here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And right now is absolutely the time for you to get ready for the NFL season because there's incredible offers over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5, just $5, and you're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. On top of that, all customers that bet $5 are also going to get $100 off of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. You can use those bonus bets to watch and you can use that $100 off of NFL Sunday Ticket to keep track of the bets that you're making. Watch every single second of it, and of course, watch all of your New Orleans Saints games if you're out of market. Now is the best time to join FanDuel because the app is super easy to use. It's convenient. You get paid out instantly. It is awesome. You can use all of it for spreads, player props, whatever it is that you're looking for. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Once again, a big thank you to all the everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. So we're taking a look now at the New Orleans Saints and how their offense stacks up across the rest of the NFC South. So basically the way that I did this is that I kind of graded, mostly looking at the starters, but in certain cases where you know you're going to see depth players, like wide receiver and stuff like that, trying to take into consideration all of that and kind of grading out this NFC South position by position and seeing where the New Orleans Saints stack up there. So for these grades, A is good, C is we don't really know what's going on here yet, and then F would be bad. I'll tell you right now, there's only one F grade that I have for the entire division, and we're going to get to it rather quickly because we're starting off with quarterback here. So the New Orleans Saints, and this is mostly just looking at the starters here, the New Orleans Saints, Derek Carr, the Atlanta Falcons, Desmond Ridder, the Carolina Panthers, Bryce Young, as well as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Baker Mayfield. There's your F. Let's just get it out of the way. Your F is Baker Mayfield. Your F would have been Kyle Trask as well. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback situation is dismal. It is depressing. It is sad. It is all of these things. Now, maybe these guys end up shocking the world, which would be awesome to see. Like, not great for New Orleans Saints fans, not great for the New Orleans Saints probably, but you love an underdog story, I suppose. And Baker Mayfield's been an underdog story before, so we're not going to completely sleep on him, but we are going to give the F grade here when it comes to the quarterback, because you're also talking about the drop-off from Tom Brady, who made your otherwise very injured, very hampered Tampa Bay offense look serviceable last year, more than serviceable last year. So to go from the greatest player of all time to this quarterback situation, not great. I'm going to give the Atlanta Falcons, the Carolina Panthers grade C's because we just don't know about either of these quarterbacks yet. I was tempted to tick Bryce Young up to a B because I think he's remarkably talented, but size, as much as we want to keep saying, oh, size doesn't matter in terms of like quarterback play and all these other things, and as much as they try to convince us of that, we've seen one successful short quarterback in the last like decade and everything like that. And so for me, I get a little bit shaky around the Bryce Young idea. We've seen it not pan out a lot more than we've seen it pan out. And so I think we should remain open to that possibility. So I'm going to give it a C for right now. And the New Orleans Saints, when it comes to Derek Carr, I'm going to give it a B. He's the only proven commodity amongst the NFC South quarterbacks. So I got to give the New Orleans Saints the edge there. Now, when it comes to running back, we can kind of have two different conversations here. Do we include Alvin Kamara? Do we not include Alvin Kamara? I'm going to actually go with not including Alvin Kamara, at least for right now, but I'm going to circle back to Alvin Kamara a little bit later. Jamal Williams for the New Orleans Saints, Bijan Robinson for the Atlanta Falcons. You get Tyler Algier, you get Cordero Patterson absolutely involved in all that. Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard over with the Carolina Panthers, Rashad White, Chase Edmonds, these guys. Sean Tucker, I think, deserves to be mentioned in this conversation too because he's really talented over in Tampa Bay. I kind of like that the NFC South has a bunch of really good running backs. Like I like Miles Sanders. I like Chuba Hubbard. Bijan Robinson's a blue chip guy. Tyler Algier, Cordero Patterson, really, really good players. And then outside of Jamal Williams, you've got Kendre Miller. Eventually, you'll have Alvin Kamara as well. I kind of just tie up everybody when it comes to the running backs here. But I think in terms of ceiling, you kind of have to give the Atlanta Falcons a little bit of a nudge here because Bijan Robinson's a blue chip guy and he can be one of the best running backs in the NFL next season. So we'll see kind of where this all leads up. But hey, the Saints are bringing back the touchdown crown from last year. So, I mean, that's pretty exciting too. When it comes to the top trio of wide receivers, Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed for the Saints, Drake London, Mac Hollins, Slotty Miller, as I like to call him, for the Atlanta Falcons, Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, and Jonathan Mingo for the Carolina Panthers, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Trey Palmer for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm going to knot up the New Orleans Saints and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here. I think both wide receiver groups are strong. I make a lot of jokes about Mike Evans and like to have a lot of fun about all that and everything like that. But like he's fine. And so, but like Chris Godwin, Trey Palmer, really, really good. He's better than fine. But like Chris Godwin, Trey Palmer, really good. But the New Orleans Saints have the highest ceiling, I think, when it comes to this position group. Atlanta's kind of got to get its figured out, but Drake London's really talented. Carolina is probably the one that I'm the lowest on, though I think Jonathan Mingo is going to be really good at the next level. So I think they have a good piece, but I think they need to figure out more of those good pieces. DJ Chark's health is a little bit scary for me. Adam Thielen's age and health are a little scary for me. So that kind of shakes things up a little bit. If we add in the tight ends, though, I have to give the New Orleans Saints the nod here. Juwan Johnson, Taysom Hill, Foster Moreau, Jimmy Graham, they're all going to see snaps. Atlanta's got a really talented tight end room of Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith in particular. Hayden Hurst, Ian Thomas, and a couple of other guys for Carolina. Cade Otton and a couple of other guys. I think Payne Durham deserves the nod here with Tampa Bay. I think the Saints have the best tight end room. But I love the tandem of Jonnu Smith and, of course, Kyle Pitts can be up there. And I think goes a long way in terms of maybe why you don't see as much investment in the Atlanta Falcons wide receiver room as you see from some of these other teams, because you have to include the tight ends into that pass catcher group. So I think I'd probably put like Atlanta, Tampa kind of in the same spot, maybe in the second spot. I'm going to give the Saints a little bit of a nudge up because I just think they have more weapons, like a greater volume of weapons. And then Carolina is kind of figuring itself out. They're like a year away from continuing to build that, I think. And then the departure of DJ Chark, just like the departure of Tom Brady, kind of hurts them a little bit as well. Starting offensive line, I think Carolina, I'm not going to go through and name all these offensive linemen. That's boring. But Carolina's offensive line has struggled. Ike Mekwonu, the guy that's been playing over at left tackle, gave up 6 sacks last year, played only 35 pass blocking snaps in the preseason. That's about, let's call it 2/3 of a game, and gave up 2 sacks over the course of that time. That's not great for a young quarterback. That's, trying to see over the offensive line, that needs the extra time, that needs throwing lanes and all those other things. That one's a little bit shaky for me. So I kind of put Carolina and Tampa down towards the bottom. Although I think Tampa's got good pieces, but they just lost Ryan Jensen, their center. That's a big time hit for them. Tristan Wirfs struggles against the New Orleans Saints, but doesn't always struggle, but does struggle. Cody Mauch and Luke Gadecki, those are good players. But I'm not feeling it. So I'm putting Carolina, Tampa Bay down at the bottom, and I'm putting Atlanta at the top. I think Atlanta has the better offensive line. As much as they might struggle against the New Orleans Saints defensive line, I think they have the better offensive line in terms of their talent. And then the addition of Matthew Bergeron, I think, helps them out a ton with what they were dealing with at that position. And then I'll put New Orleans down at second because I think they still have a lot to prove. How good is Trevor Penning really? Who's even starting between Andrews Pete and James Hurst, right? Like, can they stay healthy? All of that. Was Cesar Ruiz's great season last year a flash in the pan, or is it who Cesar Ruiz actually is? I think they still have to answer all those questions. And maybe it's just that I'm more intimately aware of the New Orleans Saints question marks in their offensive line than I am of the Atlanta Falcons. But Atlanta's done a lot to invest in their offensive line, especially with their young quarterback. New Orleans has done a lot to invest as well, but there's still a lot of question marks there. And so maybe I tie them both up, but if nothing else, I think Atlanta's maybe got a little bit of an edge when it comes to that, perhaps. So I'm giving the Saints, the tops when it comes to quarterback, when it comes to the pass catchers effectively. I could give them a little bit of a boost having Adam Prentice in that running back room. The Saints and Falcons, the only two with a fullback on their roster. I think the fullback adds a whole other element to your game. But I think offense-wise, I think that the Saints can be at the top because the roaming factor in all of this is all the different places that Taysom Hill can also contribute, right? So like he gives a boost to your running back room. He gives a little bit of a boost to your quarterback room. He gives a boost to your tight end room. Could give a boost to your wide receiver room, gives a boost to your blocking game. I mean, he just gives a little bit of juice to everything. Like he's just like a little steroid that just makes everything a little bit better. And so I think I'll give the Saints the tops when it comes to the offense, but it's all going to kind of live and die by their offensive line, which is maybe the position group that I have the most questions about. Coming up next, let's do the same thing, but we'll take a look over at the defensive side. This conversation is going to probably move a little bit quicker because the New Orleans Saints are so clearly in the lead when it comes to this side of the football. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a look at the New Orleans Saints defense versus the rest of the NFC South. Oh yeah, it's a cage match. So it was like me kind of doing a Randy Savage impersonation, but not fully committing to it. Maybe one of these days I'll build up the courage to do that. Fully committed. I am a theater kid after all. All right, so I appreciate you always, all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. So look, I'm not gonna cut corners here. I'm just looking at the defensive depth charts for all three of these teams, and I think the New Orleans Saints have the better defensive group on paper, especially knowing that the majority of this defense is rolling over from last year, with the exception of the defensive interior. The only other maybe difference, of course, is the slot cornerback conversation. It's no longer Bradley Roby. They're expecting that to be Alontae Taylor and stepping in there. But look, if your defense struggles because of your slot cornerback play, there's a bigger question about your defense. Like, that's a relatively, not fully, but a relatively lower impact position than an edge rusher, than an outside, cover corner and all that. So if your defense is struggling because your slot corners, deficient, or you have a deficiency at that position, there's bigger questions to be asking about your defense. So I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference, but it is something that is important and can win and lose a game at the wrong moment. But that's just the reality of playing cornerback. You can win or lose a game at any moment. So that's just what that is. But for the most part, this team is returning the same defense last year that was a number 2 passing defense in the NFL. And the place that they've made the biggest changes, their defensive interior, David Onyemata out, Shai Tuttle out, now at different places within the division. David Onyemata, of course, with the Atlanta Falcons effectively being asked to play nose tackle as opposed to defensive tackle. And then Shai Tuttle, who was a little bit more of that kind of zero tech guy here in New Orleans anyway, is playing the same nose tackle spot in a 3-4 base defense with the Carolina Panthers. Look, I'm just kind of, I'm not removing Tampa out of this conversation. I'm just looking at these two teams that have former Saints on them. That's all. But they replaced those two players with Nathan Shepard and Colin Saunders, who have been outstanding for New Orleans so far. So if the idea here is that the New Orleans Saints can maintain where they are in terms of being a passing defense, even if they drop a couple of spots, if they go from being a top 3 passing defense to being a top 5 passing defense, please allow me to boo-hoo for a second. It'll be fine. But then they need to boost in the run game, right? They were 24th ranked last year in run defense. And so I think you want to see that tick up. But even if that ticks up to the middle of the NFL, then all of a sudden this New Orleans Saints defense is a very, very good defense in the NFL, probably a top 10 defense cumulatively in the NFL in that case. And so which defense has the ability to be able to do that outside of the New Orleans Saints in the division? I don't know. I mean, look, I think that Carolina's got the best pass rusher in the conference, or excuse me. Well, maybe. Let me think about that. No, not the best pass rusher in the conference, but they've got the best pass rusher in the division, in Brian Burns, right? Like it took me 3 seconds to remember that Aaron Donald is still in the NFC. So no, they don't have the best pass rusher in the conference at all. But they do have the best pass rusher, individual pass rusher, in my opinion, in the division with Brian Burns. Brian Burns is outstanding. And the thing that makes it tough is that you look at 2, 3, 4 defenses, right? So you've got extra pass rushers that are coming from sort of these strong sides, weak sides, stand up, linebacker, edge rushers, things like that are kind of rushing off the edge. And so you're seeing that with like Arnold Ebiketie, as well as, of course, Caden Ellis now in Atlanta. That's really good. You've got Calais Campbell, Grady Jarrett, and then David Onyemata, who are effectively just 3 big defensive tackles that are remarkably athletic. And then you look over at the Carolina Panthers, who have built up guys like Derek Brown and Deshaun Williams, and then they add in a Shai Tuttle. You have the extra pass rushers and guys like Brian Burns and Frankie Louvu and Justin Houston, who's going to help there. So there's a lot of really good pass rushers there. But then you're not looking at just the defensive line. You're looking at the defensive front. And so in that case, for the New Orleans Saints, you have to include names like Cam Jordan and Colin Saunders and Pete Werner and Demario Davis. And so it's still, for me, giving the edge to the New Orleans Saints defensive front 7 there. And then coverage-wise, look, A.J. Terrell's really good, but he's also very hot and cold. Richie Grant, young. Jeff Okudah, more cold than hot throughout his career. Dante Jackson and J.C. Horn for the Carolina Panthers are huge question marks in terms of their health. Xavier Woods, we don't know a ton about yet, but I think he's really talented. They just added Von Bell, who of course is very talented. The Tampa defensive secondary is really good too, but again, injuries usually end up impacting guys like Jamel Dean and Antoine Winfield Jr., who's a little bit more of a run support guy. Carlton Davis, for the New Orleans Saints, you've got Paul Adebo, you've got Marshon Lattimore, you've got Tyrann Mathieu, you've got Marcus May, and now you're adding Alontae Taylor into being a full-time member of that secondary. I can see why it's completely plausible to give the New Orleans Saints the edge when it comes to defense. And look, I'm not trying to be a homer. I'm trying to be very honest here that like all four of these teams have talent on their roster. And really what it's going to come down to is the coaching, the play calling. And so when you add in Todd Bowles into that equation over on the Tampa Bay side, when you add in Frank Reich into that conversation over on the Carolina side, you add in Arthur Smith when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons side, and now Ryan Nielsen over on the defensive side. New Orleans, you've got the best defense, one of the best defensive play callers in the NFL, and in Dennis Allen, who is now the head coach as well. And then we'll see where things go with Pete Carmichael, right? It comes down to more than just the talent on the roster. So the Saints might have the most talented roster on paper, but it's going to be more factors than just that lead to whether or not they're going to be successful in the NFL. So going back to our earlier conversation about who's most integral to the New Orleans Saints' success in 2023, well, we've got to put Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael on that list as well. One last thing that I'll leave you with, just to go back to the offense real quick, just so that you know I'm not the only one that looks at the New Orleans Saints offense as amongst the top in the defensive or in the NFC South. The New Orleans Saints' top three targets at quarterback, or top three weapons at quarterback, wide receiver, and running back were compared as the 9th best in the NFL, according to Next Gen Stats and NFL.com. Derek Carr at quarterback, Alvin Kamara at running back, who they won't have for the first 3 games, we have to keep in mind, but Jamal Williams still really, really good. And then Chris Olave at wide receiver. And then Michael Thomas is in that conversation. But again, Chris Olave was the most reliable weapon last year, so they're translating that over to this year. The other 3 teams, Tampa, Carolina, as well as Atlanta, all ranked 22nd or lower. And the highest was the Atlanta Falcons at 22nd. The lowest were the Carolina Panthers at 32nd, the very pits, the very bottom of the NFL. And so I'm not the only one that looks at it this way, right? Like the New Orleans Saints have the weapons, but the bigger question mark isn't just going to be who's got the best roster, but who's got the best scheme, who's got the best execution, who's got the best play calling, who's got the best situational awareness, who's got the best team as a whole, coaching staff included. All right, y'all. Appreciate you, as always, for coming through for another episode of Locked On Saints. And a big thank you to all you everydayers out there for making us your first listen of the day every day. Coming up on Monday, after you enjoy your weekend, we're going to be taking a look at the expectations around the draft class, including the immediate impact of some of those players, how the regular season prep is going to vary from camp. We also get a little bit of media availability on Monday, so we'll have a second show for you Monday afternoon as well. And then I've got a great interview with some great folks that we're going to end up putting up later on this week as another bonus piece of content for you as well. So we got a lot coming up next week as we get into game week. Yes, we're finally there. We finally start to turn our attention to the Tennessee Titans as well. So as always, thank you very much for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.